Hello, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live session on how to leverage social media insights to learn from key online influencers. My name is Jackie Kivers. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Convosphere, a social insights agency where we work in over 70 languages and have a wealth of experience in the pharma and life sciences space. And today I'm joined by Alexandra Fulford. Alexandra?
Thank you. Yes. Hi, I'm Alexandra Fulford, also known as pharma-KOI, and I've been working in pharma digital, specialized in social media for over 20 years now, and done a lot of work around influencers and how pharma can use social media, including working with key online influencers.
So today in our discussion, we are going to be covering a range of subjects about key online influencers. We're going to talk about who they are, what they do, what you can learn from them, and some of the pros and cons and how-tos of working with these key online influencers. If you have any other questions that we don't cover in that, please feel free to put them in the comments, and we will do our best to answer your questions in the next 15 to 20 minutes or so while we talk about this subject. So I think one of the starting questions, Alexandra, is what is a key online influencer and how are they different than traditional KOLs that pharma may be used to working with?
Yeah, so a key online influencer, which is also called a digital opinion leader, all sorts of other things, is essentially somebody who has specific influence online. So whereas a KOL a KOL is pretty much always a physician with years of experience, publications, and so forth. A key online influencer may be a physician, but it may be a patient, it could be a journalist, and they may or may not have years of experience, but they certainly have knowledge, and online they will have an audience who follows them, pays attention, and who takes interest in their content and what they have to say.
Sounds good. And I know that as we've worked with some of our clients identifying key online influencers, that what they are called, whether they're called a KOI or some other name, can be quite different. Can you give me some idea of some of the different terms that you've heard?
Yes. So key online influencer, which is also KOI, can be shortened to just influencer, which is the easy one. Sometimes I've seen some pharma companies have issues using the term influencer. So they use digital opinion leader, so DOL. That's a very pharma specific term, just so everybody is aware. If you use DOL with agencies who haven't worked in pharma, they may not know what you're talking about. You also get EKOLs, and I think it's really important to flag that KOI, in my opinion, is a bit broader because it can be patients, it can be journalists. If you say EKOL, then you are specifically referring to more of a physician, so more in terms of that traditional KOL, but with the online element to it. And DOLs also tend to be, but not always, more physician orientated. And strictly speaking, if you go outside of pharma and use the term digital opinion leader or digital influencer, it can also have different meanings. So people do have to be aware that there are different terms. If at all possible, I do recommend people to use the term influencer because it's known across industries. It's a well-established term, and it doesn't exclude groups such as patients or patient associations or payers or journalists.
Yeah. So what term actually do you prefer?
I like key online influencer, but I do have to admit that, like many people, I shorten things. So if I don't use KOI, KOI, I just go with influencer. Strictly speaking, I should be saying online influencer. But yeah, one shortens things.
Sounds good. And I guess one of the questions that we hear a lot, before diving into how do you find them or figure out who they are, is what can you do with them? Why would someone want to even identify or work with an influencer at all?
So we don't have all day, but I could talk all day about this. So there are so many different things you can do with them. For me, at a very basic level, it's doing things such as co-creating content. So if you think about if you have a video that you need to do, whether it's for patients or physicians, if you co-create that with somebody who has an online network and an online influence, which is what a key online influencer has, then you would obviously hope they've been involved in making that video, therefore they will share it with their network. So that automatically gives you a broader reach for that piece of content, should give you a better ROI as well, because it's being seen by more people, and specifically the right types of people. So I think that's also really important when you work with a KOI who you've hopefully selected because of the audience they're reaching. By working with them, you have access to that audience. So that's content. You can, at a very basic level, use them for insights, right? So learn from them. What's up and coming? What keywords do they use? What content is relevant? And then at the other end of the scale, you have the more longer term side of things, which is where you really build up a relationship. And this is where I think you start to see some of that, what I would call true value. And this is where it's based around win-win and shared values. So you have a relationship with somebody who wants to have the same end goal as you. Classic example will be working with patient influencers who want other patients to learn about the disease, to become aware of the disease. Particularly if you look in rare diseases, these patient influencers are so valuable because they reach those other patients. So if you build a relationship with them, you have basically, hopefully, people who will share your content because they trust you, they believe in what you're doing, and they value what you're doing. And I think this is where you start to see, when you look at working with online influencers, you do have that scale at the one end where you're basically paying them for their services. And that's where most of these relationships will start. So you're paying them for insights, or you're paying to co-create content with them. And with time, as that relationship grows, what you hope might happen is that they will start to share your content anyway, because, as I said, there is that relationship and that trust. They know that you do good content. They have that shared value. And that is the gold that I suppose you would say you can't pay for. That's sort of worth so much, to have that genuine access to people's networks. But that takes time. And I find very often in pharma, we don't allow that time. So I've seen a lot of influencer programs which are very short. They're very targeted for one campaign or one piece of content. And then after that, there's no more effort put into the relationship. Whereas actually, if you put the effort in and you build that over time, you start to work better together, you develop better content, and then, you have this broader access to a network. Yeah. But like all relationships, if you don't feed it, or you do something wrong, it can be very negative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you've talked about all these types of things you can both learn from influencers, but also engage with them, and this co-creation. I think it raises a really important point that you need to understand before you even embark on identifying these influencers or working with them, of what your business goals are, what your business objectives are, and then what type of remit you have to actually implement them. So for example, if it's your ultimate goal is to raise awareness of a condition, well, once you identify these influencers, do you have the right team in place? Are the right stakeholders involved? to then actually make that happen, whether that's your medical comms or, an education team. Is everybody involved, and do you have the right stakeholders in the room, and have those objectives been clearly defined? Because that is important to the end goal, but it's also helps what makes the influencer identification process much more targeted and impactful. Because then you would, when looking to identify the influencers, you could understand, well, we're not trying to change prescribing behavior. We don't necessarily need an HCP who's followed in advance is really important when, at every phase of a project, in identifying the influencers all the way to implementation of engaging with and or working with them. So I guess that brings us to the question of, how do you find them? I mean, it's a project we do a lot. But as I say, a lot of the identification of who kind of fits the criteria, whether it's HCPs only, or as you mentioned, the influencer could be a patient or a medical journalist or a whole variety of things, is impacted and influenced by what you plan to do once you find them. So if it's understanding and listening and just learning from these influencers, or if it's understanding the language or themes used by these influencers to then impact your content strategy and content development or other things, it kind of refines the metrics that you're using to analyze these different influencers online and identify which ones would be the correct ones to work with and our profile. So we find them through social listening. So listening to the overall therapeutic area conversation and then focusing in on that influence. So we find it's a very manual process. I know there's different tools out there that identify influencers, but they kind of apply the same broad brush to these influencers. So if Oprah Winfrey or Lady Gaga, who have a huge online following, mentioned heart disease or something like that, in some of those automated tools, they would pop up as the influencer just based on their numbers and their reach. But that's not quite the case, So we also look at what's their authority, what's their educational background, who is following them. Is it other HCPs? Is it patient groups? Is it patient advocacy groups? What type of content they're sharing? Are they just resharing content that's already been created and they're just resyndicating it? Or, as you say, are they working to create their own view on these different topics and expressing information through different media, through podcasts, videos, or content they've created? Kind of all of that goes into the process, but it really depends. The weighting of those and the identification of those still go back to that kind of business question and business objective. So when
I was also going to jump in and say it's exactly that. For me, identifying them starts very much in-house for a pharma company. It's really being clear, what are you trying to achieve? But it's also putting yourselves in the shoes of the people you're trying to reach. So quite often I see pharma brands coming at it from their point of view. So these are our keywords that are interesting to us. And particularly if you're in a new indication, say, or a rare disease, those might not be the keywords that you need in order to reach the people you need to reach. So it's really about thinking about, who am I trying to reach? And then how do I get there? Because I've seen influencers identified who are very influential in terms of the keywords that the brand was using, but actually they're not going to meet the goals, which is to reach a new target audience, for example, because you're just sharing the same stuff. So yeah, I think that initial in-house identification is absolutely critical. And then I was going to say also, just to support what you say, make sure you're using an agency such as, yourself, who knows what they are doing, because I've also seen other companies provide lists of influencers who are totally irrelevant. And you may want to use Oprah if you have the most obscene budget. Fantastic influencer. But yeah, there are all sorts of other considerations too. So yeah.
I think a point there as well is, yes, you may want to work with Oprah and you may even have that budget, but that doesn't mean Oprah will want to work with you. So just because you have content and budget doesn't mean the influencer that you're looking to work with and engage is interested in the same. So I think there has to be a value exchange, and it doesn't necessarily need to be currency. That could be access. You could invite them into an online or offline advisory board. And so, as you said, if you need to feed that relationship. So the more kind of access or effort or energy or time invested, the potential for the return on that investment is greater. So it's something to consider when thinking through, okay, now we know who our influencers are, but will they even work with us? And, we don't want to just push content at them. We actually want them to potentially co-create or create something meaningful together. So I think there's an understanding that needs to be had, of okay, once we find the influencer, what are we going to do with them? And, how can we actually measure the impact that we're having? So thinking that measurement process through in advance is also really important.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think, and again, it's thinking for me, truly thinking, is this a short-term thing? Right. And you absolutely want to measure short term as well. Did this little initiative work? Is this worth investing for the long-term relationship? But at the same time, being aware, again, depending on your goals and the influencer, this may be something that actually I'm not going to see true results for the first 6 months, right? Because it's going to take time. And I think the other thing I would say in terms of measurement, it's sometimes also having that discussion with the influencer. So if you're looking at sort of that long-term side of things, how do they measure the success, right? If this is a relationship, it's not just about you measuring, but what does the influencer want to get out of it? What does success look like for them? And making sure you're measuring that as well.
Yeah. I think another important thing that people should consider, especially if they're doing a multi-market project or trying to understand this across geographies, is that picking influencers in one market, like the US, may have zero impact on any of the other markets, or there might be crossover and connections that happen between, let's say, Brazil and somewhere else, like Portugal, because of language, or there may be crossover and influence from Spanish HCPs who are influential, influencing other HCPs in Latin America. So you don't want to just make an assumption, but you can look and see how there are connections between these influencers that expand beyond the market or geography that you're looking in.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, because very often in pharma, largely driven because of our regulatory environment, a lot of initiatives are done by country as opposed to language. Now, I'm also happen to be a patient advocate, and I don't care where I get my information from, as long as it's in a language that I understand and it's of good quality and all of that. And I think this is something also when we look at influencers, and again, like all things, it depends, but very often I will advise people to focus first on your language rather than restrict it by market, particularly if you're looking at patients, go language first. You can always then restrict it after that. But I think it's about, again, like all things, put yourselves in your target audience's shoes. What are their behaviors? What are their needs? What do they do? And a lot of this you can think for yourself. You know, we are all, you know, internet users. We're all social media users. What are your own behaviors? How do you respond to content? And the only thing I'd say with languages and social media is then, of course, also timing. So if you are trying to reach people in Australia, working with an English-speaking but US-based influencer may not be the best option, because just they're not going to be posting at the right time to be hitting your Australian audience, right? So it does depend, but yeah.
Yeah. So what are, if you had to give someone your top 3 tips of identifying, working with, or learning from influencers, what would be the top 3 things that you would want people to take away?
I think customer first. So really understand your customer. Then understand what you're trying to do. So have those business goals, be very clear, very specific. And I think when you look at influencers, I think the third thing for me really is relationship. So move away from this single video or how we've traditionally approached things in pharma, but actually really focus on that relationship first, because if you get that right, that's where the real value lies.
Sounds good. And if any of you out there are interested in more information about how to identify key online influencers or how they're differentiated from traditional KOLs, all the way through what we can do for you in identifying, profiling, and giving engagement recommendations, we do have a white paper out that's free. Feel free, I believe it's in the comments of this event. And or if you have a very specific question, certainly reach out to myself or Alexandra, and we would both be happy to follow up and answer any other questions that you may have. So thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And I could talk all night about this. So
excellent. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.